I'm Keith Poston. I'm the President and Executive Director of the Public School Forum of North Carolina, and I'd like to add my welcome to all of you for coming out tonight. As Mike mentioned in his welcome remarks, we have been recognizing leaders with our J. Robinson Education Leadership Award since 2000. Many of the former recipients are here tonight, and I'd like to recognize them now. And if you would please stand as I call your name. Now, to give you a chance to have a proper round of applause, last year's recipients, former Governor and Mrs. Jim Hunt. Dr. Sam Houston from North Carolina Science, Mathematics, and Technology Center. Larry Siegler, retired executive with DSM Pharmaceuticals. Where's Larry? I know he's here with a great crowd from Pitt County. Got a huge crowd from Pitt. Dr. Dudley Flood. All right, where's Phil Kirk? There he is. Phil Kirk is with Brady Energy Services, but of course, among many, many leadership roles, he was Chief of Staff to one of tonight's honorees, Governor Jim Martin. And finally, Dr. Jim Cosby, longtime school administrator and former head of the North Carolina School Superintendents Association. Did Jim make it? Thank you. Now, tonight's event is extra special. Not only are we recognizing the 2016 recipients of the annual J. Robinson Education Leadership Award, we are celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Public School Forum of North Carolina. Now, we officially opened our doors in February of 1986. Many of the original founders of the forum are here tonight. Other key early players are here. You're going to see some of them on the stage. But first, we have a brief video we'd like to play that we put together that we believe captures who we are, how we came to be, and why our mission is as vital today as ever.
The publication of A Nation at Risk in 1983 focused national attention on the need to improve public education. At the same time, our state's economy was changing rapidly as traditional sectors like textiles, manufacturing, small farming, and tobacco were being replaced by new jobs and new industries. The state's education policy arena was also changing.
There was a lack of communication with some of the critical groups that needed to talk about how to make North Carolina schools the best in the country.
In response, some of North Carolina's legislative, business, and education leaders came together. They understood North Carolina's rich tradition of public-private partnerships and believed a new permanent organization was needed to carry the banner for public schools over the long haul.
If you could bring the different players into the room talking on a common agenda, that it could make a big difference. You know, having teachers talking to business people, to policymakers, to administrators, and basically having a place where that could all occur without people pursuing individual agendas was going to be a great way to make good things happen.
That belief was the start of the Public School Forum of North Carolina. The original group envisioned the forum primarily as a think tank that would generate ideas for school improvement and build the will to turn those ideas into reality.
If we were going to succeed as businesses, the only way we're going to succeed is to have well-educated students coming out of the public schools.
The forum evolved into a think and do tank that has generated ideas and launched initiatives that have improved education in North Carolina. Some of these initiatives include the NC Teaching Fellows Program, the Education Policy Fellowship Program, the Institute for Educational Policy Makers, the Center for After-School Programs, the Local School Finance Report, and Roadmap of Need. 10 international study trips and 16 and counting biannual study groups.
One of the great things about the Public School Forum is that it has never engaged in easy talk. It has always gotten straight to the point. It's had the courage to tell the truth about where we were, where we are, and it has had the gumption to propose what we need to do to have excellent schools and educate our children well, even when a lot of people didn't recognize that and didn't want to hear it.
Today, 30 years later, as the economy continues to change and challenges and opportunities evolve with it, so has the Public School Forum. New focus areas have emerged, including supporting beginning teachers and studying issues of race and childhood trauma and how they impact the classroom. One thing has remained constant: the Forum's unwavering commitment to North Carolina's public schools and the belief that every child in North Carolina ought to have educational opportunities that prepare them to achieve at the highest levels, limited only by their imaginations.
Well, you no doubt recognized some true North Carolina originals in that video. Senator Dan Blue, then Senator Jerry Hancock, Martin Lancaster, Tony Rand, CP&L Sherwood Smith, IBM's Dick Doherty, and Z. Smith Reynolds' Tom Lambeth. These are truly our founding fathers of the Public School Forum of North Carolina. Now I'll let Jerry Hancock and Tom Lambeth, who are sitting there, they can decide which one of them is Alexander Hamilton. Maybe not with a duel. But honestly, everyone in this room tonight is part of the Public School Forum history and the Public School Forum story, because you are educators, you are elected officials, you are business leaders, you're all coming together for one reason, and that's because you care deeply about education in North Carolina. Yes, we have a rich history of programs and initiatives at the Public School Forum, but honestly, at the core, it's a simple mission. You bring groups and individuals together to focus on what's best for children. Now, this event would not be possible tonight without the generous support of our sponsors, and I'd like to thank them now. Carolina's healthcare system, Duke Energy, Golden Corral, Metametrics, Quintiles, SAS, the Dixon Foundation, the Watson College of Education at UNC Wilmington, and Wells Fargo. Let's give those sponsors a round of applause. I also want to recognize all of our table sponsors quickly. Appalachian State University College of Education, BB&T, Biogen, Burroughs Wellcome Fund, East Carolina University College of Education, EdNC, Everett Gaskins and Hancock, First Citizens Bank, Gregory Poole, Howard and Pat Hallworth, James E.S. Hines Foundation Fund, the Harvey McNary Foundation, Michael and Suzanne Priddy, the NC State College of Education, the North Carolina Association of Educators, the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, Patheon, Pitt County Schools and Pitt County Educational Foundation, Schwartz and Shaw, reps from the Teaching Fellows Commission from 1986 to 2015. We have a wonderful table of former commissioners and commission chairs here tonight. Tom and Mary Mack Bradshaw, the UNC Chapel Hill School of Education, VIF International Education, and Wake Med Health and Hospitals. Let's give those sponsors a round of applause. Now, some of you know that know me know I used to be the spokesman for Progress Energy, now Duke Energy, who's here. Actually, my former boss, Nancy Temple, is here, right down front. She was actually Governor Martin's chief of staff during his second term. Now, being a spokesman for an electric utility company in a state that's prone to hurricanes and ice storms, you get a lot of practice talking to the media about how long it's going to take to get the power back on. Actually, as a spokesman for a power company and a cable company, I got a lot of practice talking about and saying things like, we're very sorry for the inconvenience. But honestly, the part that was, and I know Nancy will remember this, the part that was the greatest part of my job when I worked for Progress Energy, and what I always kept top of mind, was that when I spoke, I was representing thousands of linemen who were out there in the elements doing their jobs in bucket trucks and climbing poles and clearing limbs. It was tough work. I was proud to speak for them. The reason why I told that story is because today in my job at the Public School Forum of North Carolina, that's how I feel about teachers. There is not a single day that I do not think about all of you. I think about my sister, who has been teaching for 20 years in Cumberland County. I think about the wonderful teachers that I had, the amazing ones that taught my daughter. There's a couple of those here tonight. And I think about the many of you in this room who I have gotten to know and who I get to work with now on a regular basis. It truly is the privilege of my life to speak up for you. One thing we ask for all of our sponsors is to allow us to seat 2 North Carolina educators at each sponsored table. So if you ask me, and I'm sure our honorees would agree, our teachers are the real heroes here tonight and the ones who need recognition. So what I'd like to do, now you've already been clapping, but you're going to have to clap some more, is I'd like to ask every person who is currently a classroom teacher in North Carolina to stand up. Everyone who's a classroom teacher in North Carolina. All right, we're not done. Now I want everyone who has ever been a classroom teacher in North Carolina to all the teachers stay up. Now I want all the ones who've ever been a classroom teacher to stand up too. Look at that. Thank you. Thank you for what you do every day. Now, at a gathering like this, there are just too many special guests to name them all, but I do want to at least point out a couple of people. We have many members of the Public School Forum Board of Directors here and our forum membership. I want to thank my friend Bruce Beasley, the chairman of the J. Robinson Committee this year, and all the people who worked on that. But if you're a member of our Board of Directors or a member of the forum, would you please stand? I know we had a number of representatives who had registered to attend, but I know there's been a lot of business going on down in the General Assembly. But I know we had Representative John Ager. I don't believe I saw John here. Representative Rosa Gill, Representative Bobby Richardson, and I know Senator Mike Woodard's there because he's sitting right behind JB. So we'll get a welcome to Mike. And if I missed anyone in the General Assembly, I apologize, but we tried to keep up with all the lists. I also want to recognize our fine State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Dr. June Atkinson. One of the many joys of my role at the forum is I have the opportunity to get to know people like our next speaker, Dr. Dudley Flood. Dudley, if you want to start making your way up, I'll give you a little intro, although for many of you, you don't need an introduction. Dr. Flood is a former classroom teacher and school leader but many of you in this room came to know Dudley Flood during his distinguished career at the Department of Public Instruction, where he was a specialist in school desegregation and race relations. He helped school systems all across North Carolina navigate a turbulent time in our state and our nation's history. And frankly, thanks to leaders like Dudley Flood, we came through it together and a better state for it. Perhaps there's some lessons we could apply today, governors. We've been talking about that a lot in the last few weeks. Dudley worked closely with Dr. Jay Robinson, who is our award's namesake, and we've asked him to share a few remembrances. Please welcome Dudley Flood.
Thank you, Keith, for recognizing me, because I needed that. When I was coming up the steps, one lady yelled at me and said, "Denzel, I didn't know you were here tonight." Thank you for that clarification. Jay was not just a friend of mine, but Jay was a person who I learned a great deal from. And you have a blip on the program about Jay, so I won't be redundant to that. But the one question I've been asked most often about my friend Jay Robinson was, what was his leadership style? You cannot characterize a person like Jay, but I can give you two examples that would characterize his leadership style. Jay once told me that if you're talking to a public gathering of Americans and you want them to remember what you say, you must quote a famous American. So I want to quote you a famous American. Al Capone, very famous American, once said that I have learned that you can go a long way in this world with a big smile on your face and a gun. Al went on to say, I have learned, however, that you can go farther without the big smile than you can without the gun. Now, Jay would not endorse that, but I will tell you about Jay. His technique was that he knew he could go a long way with a big smile on his face and a very sophisticated plan for getting things done, primarily getting things done through other people. I don't know anybody who was more persuasive in the quiet way that he was than Jay Robinson. It wasn't his talent just to get people to do things. It was that he could get people to want to do things. And when you're able to do that, you don't have to stand over them, you don't have to watch them. When Jay was superintendent in Cabarrus County, the county changed. When Jay was superintendent in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, the system changed, and each time for the better. So finally, if I were to characterize him, I would use the example of my favorite leadership philosopher, Lao Tzu, who founded Taoism. You are familiar with Taoism, but you will be after you go home and get on your computer. Spelled Taoism. I don't speak Chinese, but I can spell Chinese. But Lao Tzu said, of the greatest leaders, the people only know they exist. The next best, they love and praise. The next, they fear. And the next, they revile. And sometimes they will lose the people's faith, and the people will resort to recriminations. But of the best, when the work is done, the task complete, the people will remark, we have done it ourselves. I'm not aware of anything that Jay was given full credit for during his lifetime. But everywhere he went, something better happened. Every job he took, no matter how small, he brought it up to his level. And so far as I can see, I've never met anybody who didn't like Jay Robinson. I've never met anybody who had a bad word to say about him. That is a major accomplishment if you're in a leadership role. And so I'm so happy that you've given me this opportunity to say what many of you already knew, that one of the greatest leaders we have had in this state was quiet, country speaking, trying to let you think that he was just an average man. But Jay Robinson, the giant. Thank you.
Thank you, Dudley. I think some of us would probably say some of those same things about you. Now I'd like to invite onto the stage two individuals who are going to pay tribute to our first two honorees tonight. Jerry Hancock, as I mentioned earlier. Jerry is one of our illustrious founding fathers. He was a champion for education in the North Carolina Senate when he helped create the forum and served as our first chairman of the board of directors. I thought it was 16 years, but Jerry corrected me earlier that it was 14 years. So here we are, we're celebrating our 30th anniversary, and Jerry was chairman of the board for the first 14 years of it. As you can see, he's not one to stick around very long in one place. His firm, and Jerry himself, has a distinguished track record of service, particularly in the areas of education and school funding. In addition to helping the forum, in his spare time, he also helped found the North Carolina Biotech Center, the North Carolina Center for Public Policy Research, and EdNC. We asked him to share a few words tonight, as there are not many people who have worked as closely for as many years with John Dornan as Jerry Hancock. Now, I'm going to ask Jerry to come up, but I want Linda Little to come up too, because Linda's going to follow Jerry, and she's going to pay tribute to our second honoree, Joanne Norris. Linda worked side by side with Joanne from the very first meeting of the North Carolina Teaching Fellows Commission until the very last class was recruited some 5 years ago now. Linda has dedicated her life to education. She's a retired elementary school principal and worked in various administrative roles during her 37 years as an educator. She was appointed to the Teaching Fellows Commission, the very first appointment, in October of 1986 by Governor Martin, and continued on that commission until 2015. Her husband of 51 years is a retired music teacher, and all three of their children are in education. So Jerry, I'm going to ask you to come up here first, and Linda and I will let you give tribute to John.
Thank you, Keith. Good evening. This is a wonderful occasion. As Keith pointed out, there are a lot of people here who are involved in the beginning of the forum. Keith, on behalf of them, I've been asked to thank you for this opportunity to remember how old we are. On the 40th, if any of us are still here, I think we'll be additionally thankful at that time. Keith asked me to say something about John Dornan. John's down here terrified somewhere, wondering what I'm going to say, but he can relax. John's one of the most extraordinary people that I think I've ever known. He was the president of the forum for 25 years, from the first day. He was our first president. But he didn't become the president until he stopped being grumpy about the whole idea. When he first heard of this, John thought he'd come here from Pennsylvania to run NCAE. He'd been all over the world, all over the country, working for NEA. He was a rising star, great success. He thought he had us pretty well lined up at NCAE and knew how the power structure worked, and this notion of some new education forum just seemed deeply unsettling and a lot of trouble. So he and Gene Cosby hatched a plot to destroy the whole thing when we invited them to come to an organization meeting, I think our second or third meeting. Learned something about John on that day. You may know John's very smart, and he can size things up pretty quickly. And in the course of that meeting, he dropped the notion to destroy it and became one of the strongest leaders of the idea. The meetings continued. 2 or 3 meetings after that, the group named a search committee, looked for an executive director, put John on it, met 2 or 3 times, shut the whole thing down. Jay and I had breakfast one morning, and we'd been talking to some of the members of the committee and the others, and it was just absolutely evident. There was no dissent. We had found our leader. There was no point in continuing to look. So we offered John the job. Now, John was president for 25 years, and I think in that period of time, there was only one occasion that the board had any reason to seriously question his judgment, and that's when he accepted the job. Our sole tangible asset at that point was a very generous, actually very small, but still generous, startup grant from the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. Full stop here just for a minute. Just imagine how many organizations there are in this audience and virtually any audience that's like this that we go to in North Carolina, filled with organizations and people that owe everything to the vision of this foundation. This forum has had an illustrious career, but at the time the foundation decided to invest in it, it was only an idea. And that's the kind of vision that has built our state. Long before the Reynolds Foundation made their initial investment, they had given us their secret weapon, and for 18 months we had the assistance of Tom Lambeth, and there is simply no way to count the number of things in our state that are good and genuine and decent, that have made lives better for people, that Tom has been involved with at the beginning. So I want to publicly thank the Reynolds Foundation for that, and if we're back in 40 years, I'll do it again. I think one of the things you do when you're old is you remember beginnings and people who were there before others. So John knew that there was that, but what else caused him to accept the job? I said John sized up opportunities pretty well. Think of the moment. Governor Hunt had completed 2 terms, his first 2 terms, of unprecedented education progress. And he was followed by the election of Jim Martin, our honoree tonight, a career educator, someone who could actually explain organic chemistry. A person who had championed public schools as a county commissioner and a member of Congress and who had campaigned on a platform of improving public education as governor, and the word was he was open to bipartisan approaches. That sounds pretty good. John also knew that Dick Doherty at IBM and Sherwood Smith at CP&L were beginning to talk to corporate leaders about this and to tell them that this they thought was a good idea. So John assessed all that and decided that the stars were aligned and that it was a leap he could take. So he agreed to sign on, but only after he did one very important thing. He got Joanne Norris to agree to come with him. And if the best day the board of the forum ever had was hiring John, the best day he ever had was convincing Joanne to come with him. And you'll hear more about her later. A word about the way John worked. There was no particular secret about the way the forum worked. It was designed to be inclusive. John felt, we all felt, but John understood it better than most of us, that if you could take the largest and most vexing problems facing public education and truly convene the state's business, education, and governmental leadership, figuratively shut the door, ask them for their ideas, analyze the issue, look at the options. They're engaged in every step of this through endless meetings, look at potential solutions, decide which solutions may work, and then decide you will go and try to implement the solutions. The process developed some of the most important educational progress in our history. And there was nothing particularly complicated about it, except that what it did was involve the people capable of making something happen in our state, legislators, representatives of the governor, all the education associations, involving them in the process of deciding what it is we would do. Now, in your materials you have for the meeting, you can see a number of the things that are accomplishments of the forum. You've seen it in videotape. You can go on EdNC and see a catalog of them. Mebane, I hope I got the plug right. It's simply, the body of work is simply unbelievable. I can't resist mentioning one or two because I think they're illustrative. One is the Teaching Fellows Program. It's probably the first program that comes to mind when people think of the Teaching Fellows. It was research driven. It came out of a study showing we had to do something about the teacher pipeline. Bottom line is, it was 25 years. It was tens of millions of dollars in the General Assembly. It was managing thousands of students, tens of thousands of applications for the scholarship, a vast and complex program widely admired, the best, largest, most successful teacher scholarship program in the United States. It came out of the work in the forum. It's gone now, but it will be restored. Another of the vast areas was the forum's contribution to the subject of school finance. I've been involved in that for 25 years. Nothing can get quite so boring if you go into it in detail. But the fact is, it determines in many ways the quality of our public schools. We don't fund them equally. We never have. It's a continuing problem. North Carolina's done a good bit, has a good bit more to do. Important thing about this, I think, was that when these studies began at the forum in 1986, 1987, it was known to be a problem, but there had been very little quality work done on it. The forum did extraordinary work. They continue to do it annually ever since. One of the things that this has done is it led the legislature initially to establish the Lowell School Supplemental Fund that has provided billions of dollars since 1991 when it was founded to help our poorest schools. We need to do more, but that's extraordinary. The other big thing that came out of that, there were a lot of other things, but the other thing that has to be mentioned is that, and it's not, I think, sometimes well understood, but that this body of research substantially enabled the Leandro case. That case changed law, and for the first time in our history, a unanimous Supreme Court, relying substantially on evidence developed by the forum, established for the first time in our history the right of every child to a sound basic education. It defined what that meant in soaring language. It's now the bedrock law of all that we do for children in our state. I could go on, I won't. All the programs that they've done, got a long list here, talk about them all forever. One of my favorite, you saw here that John took a lot of people abroad. When you're involved in education, you go to a lot of meetings and people sit around and say, we can't do this, we can't do that, it's too expensive, the legislature won't do it, it's too controversial, we're just stymied. John figuratively said to the leadership of the state, well, okay, if you feel that way, do me a favor. Come with me to Japan, to Singapore, to China, to South Korea, to Finland, and let's take a look. Because if you look at the data, these are countries that in 1945 were rubble. No economy, no resources, no money, no nothing. 50 years later, robust economy, the most admired school systems in the world. Using, by the way, American techniques largely that we don't use as rigorously as they do. And when he came back, he said, okay, you've seen it. Now tell me again what it is in America that we cannot do. Powerful stuff. I think it had a great deal to do with the way many of our leaders look at the challenges they face. I want to wind up by basically saying this. There is an endless array of things that we can talk about, but the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. What John did with the forum, in my view, is to create an enduring lesson to the state about what is possible when you bring dedicated people together who love children and you persist with them over time to address, as Governor Hunt said, the complicated problems without fear. That's the lesson that he has given us. Celebrations like this are wonderful. I can tell you that we tried. You wouldn't believe how much we tried when John retired to throw him parties and things, and he wouldn't have anything. This is the first time we've gotten him to accept any kind of award, and Joanne doesn't have much use for him either. But this one is special because they love Jay and they love the forum. So this is a special night. I want to conclude, I think, by saying this. As important as a award is like this to them, the real monuments, and we just can only pray that they know this, that the real monuments to their life are the 1.5 million school children in our state, their predecessors, and their successors. Because what they have done for those children means that John Dornan, and I will poach on Linda's time and say Joanne Norris and Jim Martin, have earned a place in the pantheon of the great leaders of our state who have made a difference for children. They richly deserve this award. I know I've gone over my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Linda Little.
I'm glad I wasn't referred to as a founding mother. It's my privilege to look at a word, a chiefly Southern woman who exemplifies both traditional femininity as well as uncommon fortitude, a very essence of strength, are words for defining a steel magnolia, which also describes one of our J. Robinson Award honoree this evening, Ms. Joanne Norris. She can make a crowd of 300, 400, 500 teenagers, plus 1,000 plus parents, grow deathly quiet as she walks into the auditorium to give her welcoming requirement speech. But she can also look somberly into the face of a college student who could possibly lose a scholarship while she is explaining the repercussions of his or her actions. This validates her ability to connect to others in a steel magnolia way. Truly, Joanne's legacy to the state of North Carolina is her involvement in the Teaching Fellows Program. Of course, she refers to it as her small part in helping North Carolina for a period of time to become the personification of what education can do to lift its people. Joanne demonstrates a passionate, persistent, and somewhat patient spirit when speaking of others about the importance of placing quality teachers who have had academic and real-life experiences in their college training over and beyond the regular education program. She can even make a chancellor of a large university sit on the edge of his or her seat as she is giving the strengths and the weaknesses of his or her institution. Yet her tenacity usually is received in the spirit in which she intended. But this persistence is what kept the Teaching Fellows in the forefront for many years and is something that J. Robinson would have loved. Joanne's influence with the Teaching Fellows inspired thousands of young people to enter the field of education, and hundreds of thousands and possibly even millions of students who benefited from having quality teachers not only in their schools but in their classrooms. So her impact was not a ripple but a wave in the pond. Another description of a steel magnolia is that she gives even more hours of her already full day to organizations that do good to her community and around the world. This is true of Joanne's involvement with the Public School Forum. It was about pushing North Carolina to a higher level of progress for its people. Those of you who know Joanne well or know her casually recognize that she cares about her appearance, her dress, her shoes, her makeup, her pantyhose emphasis, as students lovingly recall. And even her jewelry makes statements about professionalism and first impressions. But her beauty shines within her as well as what the public sees. Joanne can stand before large groups of women and proclaim the importance of taking risk and making a difference around decision-making tables that can transform institutions and change the world. She affirms their worth as well as their capabilities and has emphasized that leadership does matter. She's influenced numerous women to take that extra step to become leaders in their own right. In 2011, Joanne was the recipient of the Ada State Founders Award of the Delta Kappa Gamma Society International. This is the highest award given to a North Carolina woman for her contribution to improving the quality of life of North Carolinians. The Delta Kappa Gamma Society International is an honorary society for women educators. Her other involvement with leadership centered around the Educational Policy Fellowship Program, the famous EPFP. Here she had the opportunity to serve school system employees to leadership programs where the training was intense and intentional in exposing the participants to various scenarios and to leaders within our state and beyond our state. The accolades given to Joanne have been received in humility. She speaks about the support of her family, especially her mother being a steel magnolia, as her mother became a widow at age 34 with 3 small children under the age of 11 when losing her 39-year-old husband shot in their restaurant by a customer who had been a customer for 6 years. She states, "She is a steel magnolia in my life." Joanne also speaks of her coworkers and indicates that when they're the best, it's easy. She speaks of her friends and the love and support she's had from them during the ups and downs in her life. Joanne takes great pleasure in being there for those she loves and is willing to put her needs on the back burner to do this. Yes, a steel magnolia exemplifies someone of uncommon fortitude, the very essence of strength. Joanne Norris is a steel magnolia and is certainly worthy of the recognition that she has received tonight as a Dr. J. Robinson Award honoree. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry and Linda. At this time, I would like to invite Joanne and John to the stage, and I'd like to invite Mike Priddy, our chairman, to join me before we make the formal presentation. We'll let John roll his way up, but he'll tell his own story when he gets the microphone about his leg. It might be true. But I am so honored to be here tonight to welcome them to the stage. As you probably have already figured out, or you already knew this, with John being the first executive director for 25 years, followed by Joanne the following 4 years, I'm the third. So it's pretty humbling to me to follow these two giants who I love so much and respect so much. And I've told them, and I'll tell you, as much as I think about the teachers and the work we do, I also want to make these two proud. And so I really appreciate it. So our 2016 award recipients, John Dornan and Joanne Norris. We're going to ask John to speak first, and then Joanne, if that's okay. John, I've got a...
Thank you very much. I didn't plan on being here in this condition, but here I am. Let me begin by thanking the Forum Board for this award. As you might imagine, it means a great deal to me. And it means even more tonight getting it with Joanne Norris, because for all of you who have worked with the Forum in that 25 years, we were truly a partnership. It was John and Joanne. And if you knew our work, we were incredibly complementary. If you took a Myers-Briggs exam, I'm in one corner, she's in this corner. Right brain, left brain. And I think someone summed it up best once when he said, thanks to Joanne Norris, the Forum trains run on schedule. Dornan isn't aware there is a schedule. And you get the idea. I think that might have been a tad overdone, but we really were a team, and it's fitting we're here together, and I want to thank the Forum Board for that. If I have any regret tonight, it is that we're not joined by Jerry Hancock and Tom Lambeth, the former executive director of the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. Jerry conceived the Forum, Tom immediately could see the potential in the idea, and the Reynolds Foundation made a 1.5-year planning process possible. The Tom and Jerry show met individually and had weekend retreats with first legislative leaders, then business leaders, then education officials, and finally they all came together, and that's what created the Forum. When I was asked to join the Forum staff and head it up in 1986, we had 4 things going for us that most nonprofits could only dream about. 2 of them were the result of Tom and Jerry laying the groundwork. First of all, we had legislative leaders from both the House and Senate on our board, but more importantly, supportive of the Forum and looking to it for ideas. Secondly, we had business leaders like Sherwood Smith of CP&L and Dick Daughtry of IBM, the head of BB&T, and others also on the board, and more importantly, calling on their colleagues around the state to support the work of the Forum. The other 2 factors that we had going for us are less obvious. In 1986, the Forum had what I call a golden triangle of belief, a golden triangle of vision. And it was that good education equals good jobs equals a better, more vibrant North Carolina. That was a golden triangle that was shared across party lines, Republicans and Democrats, and it was embraced by the business community. It created a climate that was very receptive to ideas and ready for change. When I look back, the 4th issue that most people don't see, it wasn't quite as visible, was the first 8 years of the Forum coincided with the 8 years of the Martin administration. And Governor Martin, as Jerry pointed out, was an educator. He didn't need convinced of the importance of education. He put together a great education staff, George Cady, who's with us tonight, and Lee Monroe, who some will remember. And while the Forum was successful in seeing a lot of serious legislation enacted in that first year, supplemental funding for low wealth, teaching fellows among them, most people presume it was simply because we had legislative support from Democrats in the House and Senate. That wasn't all. We never had to look over our shoulder to see if we were going to have ideas opposed by a governor, much less a veto. In fact, our working relationship with the Martin administration was as good or better as any of the preceding Democratic administrations. And I'm extremely honored to be receiving this award tonight with Governor Martin. Let me fast forward from 1986. For the first 20 years of the Forum, that golden triangle, education equals jobs equals a better North Carolina, held, and we were able to do quite a bit, as were other groups working together. By the 20th anniversary of the Forum, though, that golden triangle had frayed. And frankly, by the 25th anniversary of the Forum, the golden triangle didn't exist. It had been replaced by an obsession with elections and re-elections, and there was no common vision holding people together. The gulf between parties was as large as it is now, and I must say the last 5 years the Forum have gone through, from 25 to 30, were far more challenging than anything Joanne and I faced in the first 25 years of the Forum. And I want to congratulate Mike Pretty, Keith, the Forum Board, and the Forum staff for navigating an extremely difficult period of time and bringing us together tonight for the 30th. And that takes me to the future. I'd like to take a glimpse into where from here. And if you'll indulge me, I'm going to steal one of the most memorable and iconic lines in my mind in American history. Specifically, I have a dream tonight. I have a dream that 20 years from now, in May of 2036, there'll be a gathering like this. Only it will be in a much larger venue with a great many more people celebrating the forum's 50th anniversary. And I dream that at that celebration, speaker after speaker will recount how the forum played an instrumental role in rebuilding a golden triangle of belief, a vision for a better North Carolina that presumed education was its bedrock. And I dream that other speakers will talk about how North Carolina, once again, is viewed as a leader among states. And the delegations of legislators, educators, business people, and others are coming to study what we have done with innovation and education and our approaches to economic development. And last, I have a dream that in the next 20 years, the forum will take great strides toward accomplishing its original mission. That mission was encapsulated in our 1986 mission statement. The Public School Forum will contribute to building a North Carolina system of schools second to none. I have a dream. Let me end by thanking the Forum Board again for this award, but more than that, thanking them for what they do, and to all of you out there who have participated in, supported, contributed, worked for, and worked with the Forum. Bless you.
Thank you, Linda, for your generous tribute. And as you know, you are my second, still, Magnolia. And thank you, Governor Martin, for appointing Linda Little to the first Teaching Fellows Commission in 1986. After the term that you appointed her to was over, I managed to convince those who were making that appointment over the next 25 years that she was worth appointing again. She is the only person who served the first meeting all the way through the last meeting of the North Carolina Teaching Fellows Commission. The Teaching Fellows Commission had the responsibility for the Teaching Fellows program. The Forum staff was their staff, and I served as the administrator. And it was the most wonderful thing that ever happened to me in my life. I think through the Teaching Fellows program, I probably met almost every person in this room, and over time had a relationship in support of public education in North Carolina through that position. I look out, we had wonderful chairs. Tom Lambeth was the longest serving chair of the Teaching Fellows Commission. And Tom was followed by Tina Little, who is no longer with us. She was an excellent chair, as was the chair who followed her, who was Susan Burgess, who is no longer with us. John Denning, who I hope is in this room somewhere, was the first teaching fellow to become chair of the Teaching Fellows Commission, and he served. And then the commission was very fortunate to have 3 teaching fellows become members of the Teaching Fellows Commission. And they were Stephanie Lemon, Dee McKenzie, and Chad Freeman. What I hope you are seeing is a revolving service by so many people who cared deeply about the Teaching Fellows Program and therefore about the status of teaching in the public schools of North Carolina. For those of you that don't know, every campus had a director. That was key to the success of the program. So when mommies and daddies sent that angel off to a campus, there was somebody who met them the first day and who kept up with them. And as Linda said, when they didn't quite meet the standards, they had to come to Raleigh and look into the eyes of Joanne Norris and explain why they were there. Several campus directors are here tonight, and I want to thank you personally for making that effort to come. I have to say something special about Gladys Graves, and I know she's here. Gladys served as state director the longest term of any of the state directors. Gladys is a very special person, and her Rolodex is probably as long as this state. She could always reach out and ask somebody to fulfill a task that she needed. If you don't know Gladys, I will tell you, she is African American and about 6 feet tall. We were the Teaching Fellows team. Every once in a while, somebody of the students would get us mixed up. And hard to believe, but true. And Gladys would calmly say, "I am the tall one." There are other people in this audience who worked as staff for the Teaching Fellows Program, and I really had my feelings hurt when I heard J.B. Buxton tell a group of people that I was the only boss that he'd ever been afraid of. Danny Bland, a teaching fellow who taught 9 years and drove a bus in Durham, was the director of special programs, and I know Danny is here. And for others that I didn't get to see beforehand, you should have an award for the service that you gave to the Teaching Fellows Program in North Carolina. My mother was the first Steel Magnolia that I knew. I didn't know the title then, but I watched her grow in stature and strength after becoming a widow. The oldest of 3 children, I became her partner and learned the meaning of teamwork and shared responsibility in the real world. I had planned to, from the beginning, almost, be a college graduate. That was my father's dream for me, to be the first in our family who graduated from college. And of course, I had planned to go to East Carolina and had a small scholarship until I went to Girls State on the campus of the Women's College of the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And there, my life changed. That week-long experience of leadership by, for, and with other young women changed me forever. My senior year, my high school principal called me in the spring to say, "Do not sign a contract with anyone else. You are coming back here to teach first grade for me." And that is exactly what I did. I went back to my hometown and started my teaching career, which culminated in 1979 as North Carolina Teacher of the Year. My motto that year was, Governor Hunt, "I'm the best teacher I know." And some folks thought that I was being brash and whatever. What I was trying to get other teachers to understand was that when you can look in the mirror in the morning and say to yourself, "I'm the best teacher I know," you probably will be. And if that goes on all across North Carolina, just imagine what our teaching force would be like. And then my career path changed. After being back in the classroom for 6 months, I accepted a position with the NCAE as political affairs specialist. No, I did not have affairs with politicians. It was my job to train teachers to raise money to support candidates who supported education. And I walked the halls of the General Assembly when they were in session. Then something exciting happened at NCAE. A young man named John Dornan came to be the executive director of that organization. And I began trying to help him learn about North Carolina. I led him around the legislature and introduced him to President of the Senate, Jimmy Green, and Speaker Liston Ramsey from the mountains, who rarely said anything but, yeah. At an ABC budget meeting, Senator Ken Royal referred to John as that damn Yankee from up north. I did the rounds with John in the General Assembly, State Board of Education, the Department of Public Instruction, leaders of all the education associations, and we had some visits with Governor Jim Martin. And then John began going by himself. Leaders of all the education groups, with Jerry Hancock's help, as you have already heard, came together to see what the possibility of another organization was. John and Gene Cosby went to the meetings not to be a part of the meetings, but to break them up if they could. That did not happen. And after time, that organization became a full organization, and they set about to recruit a national person to come and be the lead. After about 2 weeks, they realized the person they needed was already in their midst, and that was John Dornan. I have often been asked, what is the best career decision that you have ever made in your life? I was hesitant to accept John Dornan's offer to join the staff of the Public School Forum. I was with an organization that had some size, a fairly large bank account, benefits, etc. And John was across town in a little house that had a card table, his computer from home, and a telephone. And he wanted me to leave my job and come over and be with him in that empty house. I couldn't get my head around that, but I did. And I joined the Public School Forum and John Dornan on November 1, 1986. There have been so many people in my life directing me and helping me. John Dornan for one, Jerry Hancock for another, Tom Lambeth for a third. Helping me achieve in my life, some in charge, directing me, some beside me, holding my hand, some challenging me, thus pushing me to do more or to do better. I would not have achieved as I have without all of them being in my life at the time they were there and doing what they did to influence me as they did. Thank you, Public School Forum, for lighting my way, and God bless.
Yeah, Joe, I want you to you can stay standing up if you want to join John. I'm going to ask Mike to help me with the formal presentation. No, Joanne, you stay up. We're going to make the official. There we go. We started last year. We started a tradition of having, or 2 years ago, of having something that was unique and special. We thought to signify the award, and what we have for each of them is actually a. Well, I guess John is almost an official North Carolina original now, but these were two Ben Owen pieces of pottery that Ben actually just fired a couple weeks ago but for this special occasion tonight. So we have a plaque and and some pottery for both John and Joanne to recognize them as our 2016 J. Robinson Education Leadership Award recipients. All right, I'm going to ask Mike to come up, and Mike's going to introduce Hallworth.
It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Howard Hallworth and invite him to share his personal thoughts about Governor Jim Martin, with a special emphasis on Governor Martin's commitment to public education and its place in the long-term success of North Carolina. Mr. Hallworth served as president, CEO, and chairman of Drexel Heritage Furniture, in addition to many other positions over a 27-year period from 1958 to 1985. His leadership at Drexel Heritage created the standard in the industry for manufacturers and marketers of fine home furnishings. Mr. Hallworth's work caught the eye of then Governor Jim Martin, who asked him to become the North Carolina Secretary of Commerce in 1985. Those 2 years of service then led Mr. Hallworth's next step and another of his passions. Governor Martin appointed him to the North Carolina State Board of Education, where he served for over 7 years, including 3 years as chairman. I had the privilege of working directly with him during part of that time, as he steered the policy agenda of Governor Martin and the State Board of Education through a time of significant change in North Carolina. We can all be thankful that someone of his experience and wisdom was at the wheel of the ship for public education. I'm honored to invite Mr. Hallworth to the podium.
It's a distinct pleasure for me to be asked to be here tonight to speak particularly about my governor, Governor James Martin. Jim Martin is a very special individual. I listened to previous speakers, and they did invade my territory a bit. And I enjoyed every minute of it. I enjoyed it for this reason. I heard you describe the cooperative spirit that my governor, Jim Martin, had provided over the years to the betterment of education for the children of North Carolina. And too often, there's a partisan issue that occurs within state governments, national governments, that's detrimental to our achieving what we should be achieving for our children. As I was kind of preparing thoughts for tonight, it occurred to me that Jim Martin was probably one of the best qualified individuals to become governor that I've known in my lifetime. And I get there in the following way. He was an educator, a professional educator, an outstanding educator, 12 years at Davidson College teaching chemistry, and he can explain that subject. He also was a scientist, obviously. And in addition to those two things, he was a professionally polished political individual who understood how to operate and how to handle the system and how to negotiate and work back and forth across the aisle. One of the things we're missing in America today is working back and forth across the aisle. When Jim Martin was in Washington, there was quite a bit more of that occurring than there has been recently. And I was pleased to hear John Dornan and others of you talk about how helpful Governor Martin had been in various projects to lead to better education for our children. One of the things that Governor Martin, in fact, I'm going to cite two things that Governor Martin is particularly interested in, and they happen to be things that I'm very interested in. I was pleased to hear Dudley Flood talk about Jay Robinson. One of the advantages, if you're in your 80s, as I am, one of the advantages is that you have a lot of memories and you've met a lot of great people. And one of the things that I felt so pleased about tonight was reuniting with dozens and dozens of those people that I'd lived on the playing field with over the last 30 to 35 years. George Cady has already been pointed out. George Cady and I drove all over North Carolina putting in the various programs that were necessary to enhance public education. Great guy, and I haven't seen George Cady since I left Raleigh probably 2.5 decades ago. George, it's great to see you. Let me mention something that we started the evening with, because I think it's easy to say it, but it's not easy to follow up on it, and that is how important our teachers are. Outside the students, the teachers are the most important people in a schoolhouse. I have been as disturbed as I know many of you have. 2 years ago, I guess it was, we were 47th in the nation in teacher compensation, to the credit of Governor McCrory. There have been 2 moves since then. We're now down to 41st in the nation. The legislature seems to be looking reasonably, and I say reasonably, positively upon the latest budget proposal. Time will tell. This coming week's a critical week in that regard. But it's time. We were, in 2001, we were 21st in the nation. 21st in the nation. And today we're 41st in the nation. Friends, I have to tell you, the millennials are not buying it. The millennials are not buying it. We've had a 30% drop in the enrollment of our 5 schools of education embedded in the greater university system. Tom Ross is sitting over here. He knows about that. I drove over to visit Tom Ross a couple of years ago just to discuss the challenge and the problem with kids that were in college but weren't graduating for 5 and 6 years period of time. That has in part to do with the degree to which they're prepared to be in college. And so it's very important that we solve this problem of teacher pay. It seems like such a simple subject, and yet we've made it hugely complicated. It's really not complicated. The going rate for paying a teacher is at least the midpoint of the pay in the United States of America for teachers, at least the midpoint. And when we realize that we were at 21% in 2001, it just reminds us of how far we've slipped in that area that's so critical to the education of our children. I'm hopeful that with the help of this crowd here, Public School Forum and others, I'm hopeful that we'll send the message much more strongly than we've sent it so far, that it's not acceptable. Our pipeline for teachers has partially collapsed, and I had an experience about a month ago. I was visiting with Ann Clark. Many of you know Ann Clark. She's superintendent of Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. In Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, if you know anything about us demographically, you know we have some challenging circumstances. We have high poverty. We have a number of other challenges. Ann Clark was telling me about a valedictorian. This is heartbreaking. A valedictorian who was extremely excited about pursuing a career in teaching. That young lady, in the ensuing months as she moved towards the completion of her high school years and began to think about college and pursuing that dream, adults told her she didn't want to do that, that really wasn't what she wanted to do with her life, that it was too tough, not rewarding enough, and a whole lot of other things. And she's not a teacher. She's highly successful in college today, but she's not studying to be a teacher. Now, if you can knock a valedictorian off the track that they feel very strongly about by virtue of comments coming from those of us who know better, and that should never, ever discourage a young person from pursuing their dream, then we have a little bit of a understanding of the degree of the problem that we have. The other area that Governor Martin feels very strongly about, and I have to smile when I start talking about this subject, is rigor. Rigor. Now, if you'll go back, and I'm old enough so I run into some of his old students at Davidson, but if you go back and listen to them talk, the comment is he was really tough but fair. There weren't any easy A's and B's. And the area of rigor is something we've really got to focus on. That's a tough world out there. All you are living in it, and it's not getting any easier. But we've got to enhance the rigor. I was talking with our state superintendent tonight, and I was so pleased to hear her say, one of the things that's been bothering me a great deal is that if you take our SAT scores and our ACT scores, and as you probably know, the state decided several years ago, maybe 2 years ago, that all 11th graders would take the ACT. The ACT does two things well. It lets you know whether you're career ready and lets you know whether you can do college level work. Our ACT scores in North Carolina, there are 12 states that have their 11th graders taking the ACT. We're tied for last with Mississippi. Tied for last with Mississippi. I go through a lot of data. Somebody told me, actually a chairman of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system a number of years ago, he said, do the data. It's good advice, do the data. And going back and looking through our local schools, local meaning Charlotte-Mecklenburg, I looked at all the schools that had an 11th grade. We had numerous schools that the readiness ACT was in the teens, was in the 20% range, 30% range, and yet the graduation rate was high 70s, mid 80s, low 90s, and that's why, that's one of the reasons that the Fordham Institute does not feel that graduation rates are particularly indicative of winning the battle. And in talking with June Atkinson tonight, we've been good friends for a very long time. In talking to June tonight, she told me something that really lifted my spirits about rigor. They are moving towards putting a stamp on the diploma, a career-ready stamp, and or a can-do college work stamp. So we're not going to continue to give out diplomas to tens of thousands of young people with an indication that they're career-ready and can do college-level work when the fact is they can't. And if you've listened to our new chancellor or our new president of the Greater University System, one of her first comments, Margaret Spelling, one of her first comments was that I have to be sure that I work closely with the public schools so that they send me kids who are ready to do quality work at the university level. And in return, this was just as good a part of it. In return, she said that she needed to be sure that she moved rapidly to rebuild the public education teaching network in the 5 schools of education. So there are things out there that are not the way they ought to be, but there are also hopeful things out there. And I just wanted to say to Governor Martin that one of the great experiences that Pat and I had, and you know, you don't become Secretary of Commerce and leave your wife out. That's a joint scenario. Governor learned that the hard way, by the way. I won't tell that story. But it's a joint effort. It's a joint commitment. And people all over this room have made commitments. You heard about John and Joanne. I had a wonderful visit with both of them. I heard Dudley Flood describe Jay Robinson. I had the great pleasure of serving with Jay Robinson. The last 2 years of my term on the State Board of Education overlapped Jay Robinson's first 2 years on the state board. He was an individual that had a way about him, as Dudley clearly described, beautifully described. But one of the things that cemented our friendship is that he was productively impatient about things that needed to be done for children. And if I can say one thing about myself, I've always been productively impatient about things that have not been done for children that should be, and things that need to be done for children. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. We appreciate it. I would like to introduce and welcome to the stage our 2016 Jay Robinson Education Leadership Award recipient, Governor James Martin.
But don't y'all get up, we're not through yet. Thank you so much. What a wonderful evening this has been, and I want to say a thanks to all of you for being here, and particularly for honoring these young teachers and students who have been recognized during this evening. Let's give them another round of applause, would you? I want to thank my dear friend Howard Haworth for his remarks, not only in introducing me, but sharing with us some very thoughtful remarks about the past, present, and future of education here in this state and really across the country, because we're all dealing with this. Thank you. You know, he understands education has been a part of the movement here in this state, the leadership. He also understands business so well and what it takes to succeed in competition with other businesses across the country, across the world. And that's why I wanted him to be my Secretary of Commerce. And you know, it's a difficult thing when you're recruiting someone to take on that kind of responsibility. Governor Hunt, you'll remember, you just have to work with them and try to size them out and gradually work around to it. He said, I just have one requirement. I said, oh, what is that? He said, pay me $1 a year and I'm in. And so we paid him with a check suitable for framing, and that, that made it even cheaper. So Howard, thank you, and again for being here this evening. I want to pay my respects and salute John and Joanne for their leadership of the Public School Forum, and especially for sharing this honor with them this evening. It's been mentioned that the Public School Forum was created, Tom and Jerry, in the second year of my first term. My first year hadn't gone very well with the General Assembly, if you want to know the truth about it. And there were some in my administration and political advisors who were somewhat suspicious about the Public School Forum being created, as if they didn't, they weren't sure about this new Republican governor here in the state of North Carolina. But I saw it different. It's not all that rare, by the way, that I would differ with my political advisors. I saw it as an opportunity, because here would be a new organization with people that knew what was going on and what needed to happen here in this state. And not only would it be an opportunity for us, my staff, me, to listen to them and have them translate what was needed as they saw it and as their board felt and could sense it across the state, but it also was someone to whom we could speak and would listen to us and help us to understand where we might try this as a little different or that a little differently. Because that can be so valuable when people take the time to speak clearly to each other, but just as important, to listen to each other and understand what's going on. And because of that, we were able to work together in putting teacher pay as a major issue for the state. I felt it was one of the advantages that I had, that I could get the General Assembly, which was of the other party primarily, to work in this way. They weren't going to do what I said, but if I said we're going to do this for schools, they would say, no, we're going to do this. And so we would be competing to see who could do the most for public schools. That didn't work out too badly, because we were able to increase the share of the percentage of the general fund that goes to public education. Now, it's much more than that. Of course, we worked together on the Genesis School program. You remember that? That had a rough start getting it. In some respects, that's part of what has now become the charter school movement. That's part of our public schools. And I like to see competition, and I like to see new ideas and innovation. But one of the things that I hope is we'll get to the day when our regular public schools will have the same kind of autonomy and range of freedom that the charter schools have. Now, my family has always believed in the public schools. But before I get to that, you just reminded me, I want to say another pay respects to Governor Hunt. He always knows I'm going to do this, because, see, he was my predecessor and my successor, which means that I was the bologna, between his two slices of bread. Or when I'm talking to a all Republican audience, I say the beef between his two slices of bread. It works pretty good either way. But, I was wondering, he was elected to the J. Robinson Award last year, and so I'm wondering, y'all going to elect him again next year? So he can succeed. He'll come back and make you a rousing speech if you do it, I guarantee. Governor, we worked on some things during that time and even since, and I do appreciate that. As I was about to say, my family were believers in the public school system, and that you have to realize that was in South Carolina, and I was so proud the people of North Carolina didn't hold that against me, that I came here from another state. But if you look at my biography, it says I went to Mount Zion Institute, and some people would immediately say, well, that's a private school, isn't it? No, that was just what they call the public school there in Winnsboro, South Carolina. And I'll tell you this, if they had invented wide receivers back in that day, I might have amounted to something. I played, it was tight end. That was the only position you had on the end of the line, because if you went outside, who was going to block that big tackle? They never thought that if you send somebody out there, they got to send somebody with you, or you'll be wide open. That was what the Lonesome Inn at West Point had to do. But I digress. You see, my theme, you can see how the Public School Forum bought into this. It was a slightly different triangle. I said it was, better schools, better roads, and better jobs. And these three all kind of work together in a very dependent triangle that would stand strong together. And that was sort of the theme. And every once in a while we'd throw in something else, better public safety, a better lieutenant governor, whatever it was I was talking about at the time. But it was a good theme: better schools, better roads, better jobs. And the audiences, the political rallies, they could say that and repeat it with me. It wasn't that complicated. But that's largely the key to it. You put schools first. Now think about that. This is radical, George. You pay attention? If you put public schools first, you don't have to worry about raising taxes for public schools. Education was second. Third, because the universities and the community college system. That means that when you get way out to your 24th priority, that's when you run out of money. And who's going to raise taxes for your 24th priority? Nobody's going to worry about that. So put first things first, and it'll all work out. And thanks to the relationship we had with the Public School Forum, there were people who would listen to us and compete with us to see who was going to do the most for public schools. Now, there's one other subject I want to take your time, and I realize that maybe some who won't agree entirely with what I have to say this evening. You may be wondering how I'm doing. Several people asked that during the evening. I just think there was some news about passing my 80th birthday. And I'll say, no, I'm doing fine. I'm just trying to shake off this terrible case of that HB2 virus that's been going around. Now, here's the way I see it. We've gotten so polarized in our politics with safe districts for each party that become increasingly polarized, especially when you good moderates pull out of both parties, leaving them even more polarized. So that the candidates who can get nominated in these safe districts don't have to pay any attention to the concerns of those on the other side. And in my view, that's what's happened with this issue. The city of Charlotte had a year ago had a proposal to add to the protected classes for anti-discrimination, we do it in shorthand, the LGBT community. And they couldn't pass it because there were a couple who were for it, but wouldn't do it unless they also put in the bathroom thing. And so this year, they had the extra vote they needed, and they put that through. The reaction from the General Assembly was predicted, and it was an overreaction. They weren't listening to the other side, just as the Charlotte City Council wasn't listening to the other side. I have to blame both. And yet I see that if we're going to get out of it, it's going to have to be my party that's going to have to take the lead to find a solution, and I have one to suggest to you this evening. Because I give great credit to 4 members of Charlotte City Council who came up here to Raleigh, met with leadership of the General Assembly, had a plan that might have worked if they could have gotten enough votes to simply, for the time being, rescind the bathroom, shower room, locker room provision, and in turn the legislature was going to meet them with regard to the expanded protected classes. But they couldn't get the 7 votes that it would take to override a mayoral veto. So I don't see anything on the horizon right now that's moving us toward a solution, and that's the reason that it occurred to me that we have to do something very simple, just to call timeout and put it back like it was before Charlotte. Not an easy thing to do, but relatively simple. If the legislature could get majorities to do this, to say, first, we repeal HB2, and in lieu thereof, we make a declaration that the state has sole responsibility for access to multi-occupancy restrooms, showers, locker rooms, whatever, and then put a period right at the end of that. In other words, don't name anybody. Don't rule against anybody. Don't discriminate against anybody. Just say that for the time being, that's off limits, and that's the state responsibility. That's like an armistice, if you think about it. It gives people time that if we can get them to cool the passions and get together and talk about it, where the conservatives learn about the issues that young people with confusion or with confusion between their chromosomes and their hormones. And so that the liberals will understand the fears that on the conservative side, which were not about the fears of some transgender person, but of someone pretending to be going into the shower and locker room. Maybe they're wrong, maybe that's foolish, but that's what they believe, and we need to take time and let people listen to each other, get together, and then if there's, I don't think it's going away, and then get together and work out something that makes sense and reasonable accommodation on all sides. Those of you who are in the public schools know that you have dealt with this for years, and you've worked out ways to do it. I met with, it just happened to be meeting with some a public school, West Iredell, for example. We were talking with students about how to manage your money with the job that you might get, and they kept asking, well, what about this, what's going on here? How did we get this? And they told me that, yes, they have students who are transgender and oriented in that way, and they work it out with them and their parents, and nobody has been concerned about it. In a way, you could say, why mess with that? Why not let people do what they were doing? Well, it's not going to end with this, and I'm not the final authority on it, but I think if we can at least take that time out, call a recess, let everybody settle down, and get together and start talking sensibly with each other, maybe as a wise person once said, this too shall pass. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you, Governor. We're honored to have you here tonight, but we're especially honored to have your leadership and your statesmanship and your record of support for education, and congratulations and thank you for being here tonight.
I know the hour is late. We're ready to depart. We hope you've enjoyed the evening. I know that lots of people deserve credit, but I'd like to especially give credit to Keith Poston and his staff for this evening. Thank you, Keith. Well done. On your drive home, I wish to ask you, even I want to encourage you to think about all the heroes of public education in your life and in the lives of your family. We are in a period of time in North Carolina when it is especially important that we recognize our public school teachers and express our appreciation for the work they do every day. Many of them are here tonight that we've invited as guests. We're so proud of you. Thank you for coming, giving your time this evening, knowing that you have to be in the classroom in the morning at 7:30. We're nearing the end of the school year, let me just encourage you, pick out those one or two people that you know have helped children, call them or write them, let them know that they matter. We think that's critical. You know how you would feel if somebody said, hey, you did a great job today. Thank you for helping my child. Let them know that. As you drive home tonight, we pray that you drive safely and have a good, restful evening, good day tomorrow, and thank you again for being with us to celebrate the 30th year of the Public School Forum, to recognize Governor Martin, John Dornan, and Joanne Norris. We thank you. Good night.